Hey guys, and welcome back. Or if you're new around here, hi, my name's Georgia, and on my platforms around the internet, I talk about true crime. Today I've got a case for you that is absolutely unlike anything else I've ever covered. This is a murder case with zero motive, zero reasoning behind it. 42-year-old Vera Anderson was found dead in her car in August 1991 in what seemed to investigators to be a hit. But she was just a very normal middle-aged woman with no enemies. No one had a single bad word to say about her. This wasn't a robbery, she wasn't sexually assaulted, there was nothing investigators could find as to why somebody would want her dead. So why was she murdered, and who was the culprit? 33 years on, police still haven't given up on her case. They say this is one that will always remain open until it's solved. They're still actively working on it today, and they say they will never rest until they get closure for Vera's family. And I believe them when they say this. New information about Vera's case has even been released within the last couple of months, and we're in 2024 now. It very much feels like they're on a final push here. It feels like this could genuinely be solved soon, especially now so many years have passed and maybe loyalties have changed. So I think this is the perfect time to talk about Vera Anderson and hopefully bring some more eyes to her case. We're going to be based here in England for today's story. Vera, whose full name was Veronica but she always went by Vera, lived on Hadfield Close in Widnes, an industrial town up north in Cheshire. She lived there with her 7-year-old son Neil, but she also had an older 19-year-old daughter called Lorraine who had moved out. Vera was said to be a dedicated mum. Her children were her entire world, and those children back this up. They still say today that she was just incredible. Lorraine said to Crime Watch just a couple of years ago that her mum was a kind-hearted, generous, just all-round lovely woman. She was very well known in the local community for just being someone to always help out when you needed it. And I know it's very much the done thing after somebody is found dead that everyone just says lovely things about the deceased. But investigators have said that in Vera's case, every single person they've spoken to has not had a single bad word to say about her. Like, they have never found anyone who had a single problem with Vera. She just didn't have a single enemy. She didn't have anyone who even disliked her. She was just genuinely a lovely, lovely woman by all accounts. Even her ex-husbands, it seemed, had nothing bad to say about her. She was twice divorced and also separated from the father of her youngest son, Neil. And of course, they were all interviewed as part of the investigation process here. They all had alibis and no motives to hurt her. At the time of her death, Vera was seeing somebody new though, a trucker from down south. But they were said to be very happy together. According to the Manchester Evening News, he was even about to move in with her, and everyone was really excited about it. He, again, had an alibi for the night she died. Vera also ran a very successful business by herself. She sold sandwiches to local businesses and offices, so it's not like she was struggling for money and maybe had to turn elsewhere for help and got herself in trouble. She was just a very independent woman, beloved by all, and then suddenly seems to have been killed by a hitman. Her story would change on Saturday the 24th of August 1991. As far as anyone knows, this day was like any other for Vera, and she spent the evening watching TV as usual whilst her son was asleep upstairs. But then around 10 p.m, she received a phone call. Now, we don't know who was on the other end of the line, nor do we know what was said on the phone call, but it seems that whatever it was, it did prompt Vera to go and wake up her son and take him round to the neighbours, where she asked the neighbour if they could just look after him for a little bit. 10 minutes, she said. She was just going to go pick up something for her brother. She even left the TV and lights on in her home, so she definitely intended to be back very soon. The neighbour said she didn't think much of this at the time. She was very happy to watch Neil for a little bit, but she did say it was a bit odd that Vera said brother instead of referring to her brother by his actual name, which she usually always did. But it does seem like this was just an excuse Vera was using because the phone call did not come from her brother. So after dropping Neil at the neighbours, Vera then goes to her car and clears some bits out. She drove a Ford Cortina and she just takes everything out of the boot, a pram and a box with her jumper cables in it, and then she drives off. So it really does seem like she was genuinely intending to pick something up. Like, why else would she go to the effort of clearing everything out, making sure she had space in her boot? She drives away, and that's the last thing we know for sure in this timeline until a police officer came across her car and her body inside at 3:15 a.m. She was found parked down the end of a service road at the old tannery works on Tannery Lane in Penketh, which was less than a 10-minute drive from her house. Now, this entire place has since been demolished and has made way for a large modern housing estate. But before this, the Penketh Tanning Company had been a major employer in this area for many decades. They owned a large complex on which the business sat, lots of large buildings that had gone derelict since the company shut down and moved out in the mid-80s. So it was now 1991, some of those buildings had been demolished or partially demolished, others had been taken over by other businesses temporarily in the area. And generally, this just wasn't a place that you went to hang out. Like, unless you had a business there, you wouldn't really go there. But from what I can gather, it was known to be a bit of a dodgy place in the area. It wasn't the kind of place you'd want to go on your own at night. So as a result, police officers would often patrol this area throughout the night. Hence why Vera's body was found at 3:15 AM by a police officer in this generally quite random, remote area. Vera was found slumped over the wheel of her car in what was quite obviously a murder from the get-go. This was a very bloody scene and has been described by police as overkill, quite literally, because it seems like the killer used two fatal means of murder. Whoever killed Vera really wanted her dead. It seems that Vera was first strangled with a white sash cord that was found at the scene, kind of like something used in old-style sash windows, and then they slit her throat, and they were never able to find the knife that was used for this. Detectives have said that a murder of this level of brutality is something really rare. It's really not something they come across often in their careers, especially when used against a 42-year-old middle-aged mum of two. Vera was also found to have a number of injuries to her lower legs from where she was sort of like kicking out of the foot pedals of her car as she struggled against her killer. So to me that sounds like the killer came behind her with a sash cord around her neck and she was kicking her legs in the footwell. At the scene, they also found an 8mm blank cartridge in the footwell from a blank-firing handgun. Detectives believe that this may have been shot to scare Vera into complying with what they wanted, which is probably to stop her from running away. And then, to top the scene off, they also found that a chunk of hair had literally been ripped from her scalp from the left side of her head with brute force. The overkill, the two means of murder, the use of a handgun to scare her, the fact that her hair was ripped out of her head, all seemed to point in one direction to investigators. This seemed to be the result of a professional hit. Vera was found fully clothed. She wasn't sexually assaulted. This wasn't a robbery. Somebody called her that night and for whatever reason asked to meet in this location, to which Vera agreed. Her neighbour said that when she left, Vera didn't seem stressed or upset. She seemed quite sure that she'd only be gone 10 minutes. She wasn't worried about going to meet this person. It was just like she was running any other errand. But whoever she was meeting clearly had alternative plans, and they seemed to know exactly what they were doing. In terms of evidence at the scene, there really wasn't much. There was the sash cord, which does seem strange to leave behind if this was indeed a professional hit, and there was also a single white cotton Minette glove stained with Vera's blood. The glove didn't seem to belong to Vera, and the fact that only one was found at the scene suggests that the killer used it specifically for the murder, something else pointing towards this very much being premeditated. This specific type of glove was said to be used in a lot of technical or scientific roles, which, if not a hitman, could give a clue as to the line of work of the killer. And the final very interesting clue found at this scene was a discarded empty cigarette box. The brand was Embassy Regal, which wasn't Vera's choice of cigarette as she was indeed a smoker, but her DNA was found on the wrapping inside the box. It's reported that just the day beforehand, she'd actually bought a packet from her actual choice of cigarette, Barclay cigarettes, from her local shop. And I don't know exactly how much Vera smoked, how many packets she tended to get through in a week, but we all know that when a smoker has a favourite brand of cigarette, they generally remain pretty loyal. The strange choice of brand here just didn't make sense to those who knew her. Did she perhaps share a cigarette with her killer before she was killed? Did this pack of cigarettes belong to the killer? So with all of this evidence in mind, one of the first things investigators focused on in this case was figuring out a timeline of Vera's movements that night. But still to this day, there are 5 hours between leaving her home around 10:10 PM to 3:15 AM that are almost completely unaccounted for. Kind of. It's thought that she was actually killed anytime between 10:45 and 12:15 a.m, but without witnesses, there's no way of knowing with certainty. One witness, a man who lived in the houses that overlooked the old tannery works, said he remembered looking out of his window that night just before he went to bed, and he saw a car parked on the service road with its headlights on. This was around 11 p.m, and although there's no way of knowing for certain that this car was definitely Vera's, it was in the exact location that Vera's car would be found 4 hours later, so we can probably assume that it was her car. When she was found, the car battery was flat, so it seems like when she was killed, the car was either still running or she hadn't had the chance to turn off her headlights yet, and then the battery just ran out at some point before 3:15 a.m. Another couple returning from a local social club would also report seeing a car in the same spot at 1:30 a.m. I don't know if they said anything about headlights, I'm assuming not. Investigators made countless public appeals for anyone to come forward with any sightings of Vera that night, and there was one witness who contacted them with something very interesting. There was a possible sighting of Vera at the Crown and Cushion pub in Warrington around 10:30 p.m, and this pub is just minutes from where her body would later be found. Now, this wasn't a pub that Vera would generally hang around in. She was more of a local at the Roll-In Truck Stop and Motel as one of their very few female regulars. But hey, we can all visit different pubs from time to time. That doesn't mean she can't go to any other pub. This potential sighting came about 20 minutes after Vera left home, so the timing could match up here, but the witness wasn't somebody who knew her personally, so they just described somebody fitting Vera's description. The woman was seen with a man, a white male in his late 30s to early 40s, around 5'8" to 5'11", slim build, with sunken temples and mousy coloured short hair and a moustache. He was also wearing a fawn jacket. Now, this man was considered a prime suspect at the time. A photo fit of him was issued widely, but he never came forward. Witnesses said it didn't appear like the pair were intimate, but they definitely were chatting away like they knew each other. And nobody knows what time they left the pub, it just must have been some time before closing. Whilst this lead was very much followed up on at the time and the pair have never come forward or been identified, investigators do say today that they fear this was more of a red herring than an actual lead. They don't know for sure that this woman in the pub was Vera. It could have just been any random woman that they've spent a lot of time on over the years. You see, the woman in the pub was seen getting a drink that wasn't Vera's usual choice according to her loved ones. She generally wasn't much of a drinker, but when she did drink, she was a stout or pale ale kind of gal, and this woman got a lager. And when Vera left her home, she was just in very casual clothing, a t-shirt with Chinese writing on the front, a blue blazer jacket and flip-flops. And those who knew her say she never would have gone to the pub in such casual clothes. She was the kind of person who took a lot of pride in her appearance. She always made sure to be dressed up and looking nice before she went out, like literally anywhere public. And this was very much a rushing out the house and just going to throw on whatever jacket I can find, whatever shoes are within reach kind of outfit. Like, it just wasn't like Vera to go to the pub dressed like this. This also suggests to me that she felt comfortable with whoever she was meeting up with. She didn't feel the need to make herself look nice. So whilst investigators can't disregard the Crown and Cushion lead entirely, there's never been any confirmation that this woman was Vera. Investigators say today not to focus on this too much. They don't know for sure that it has any relevance at all. Their main focus has always been to just establish for sure what her movements were once she left the house, and they can't establish this. Another interesting lead came at 11:15 p.m. A member of the public was driving on Tannery Lane, which is the road the service road came out onto, and they reported how a car emerged from the service road at speed and cut across her path, almost resulting in a crash. Now, the pair very narrowly avoided hitting each other, but this is very interesting because this is thought to be around the time that Vera was murdered. So did this driver just have a near miss with Vera's killer? She described the car coming out of the service road as a hatchback type car in brown, and I know brown cars would be quite distinctive nowadays, but I'm not sure if that would have been the case back in 1991. I think they were more popular back then. This car has never been able to be tracked down. It was maybe a Vauxhall Astra, a Talbot Horizon, a Datsun Cherry, or a Mitsubishi. So yeah, there are a fair amount of potential leads in this case, things that may or may not be connected. But what about forensics? What about DNA? Well, this is a 1991 case, and at the time, DNA tech was in its infancy, so there wasn't loads they could do with the forensic evidence they did find. But it is now 2024 and things are on the move. In February of this year, DCI Adam Waller of the Cheshire Police explained to the Manchester Evening News that they don't have any DNA from the scene that could be 100% attributed to the killer. They have lots of partial profiles that they can run against any suspects, and they have since looked at every exhibit from the crime scene and had them re-examined by forensic scientists to see what they can do. In more recent years, they have sent new evidence off that they couldn't send off at the time because of technological limitations, but unfortunately, back in the 90s, exhibits were handled and treated a lot differently than they are nowadays, so there's lots of potential DNA profiles that would have been contaminated and have now degraded over time. They're also super mindful that every time you examine a piece of evidence for forensics, you're destroying a little bit of it, and therefore you're reducing their ability to use that again in the future. So they really do have to be super careful with what they're testing in this case. They have to bide their time and wait until they know with certainty that testing is going to provide answers, and then they're actually going to be able to use that in court that it hasn't been contaminated. They've deliberately not tested some material yet so they can keep it for that exact reason. So they may well have the DNA of the killer just sitting there waiting, but testing it is a risk. It's really hard to know what the best thing to do is in this situation. I'd also be very interested what they can do with the DNA profile if they ever are able to get it. Here in the UK, they can compare the DNA against existing criminal databases, but we don't have access to forensic genetic genealogy in the same way America does. The government just haven't approved it here, and I'm not convinced they ever will do. So if they do get the DNA profile of the killer and there's no match in existing databases, I don't really know where they go from there. I know they could apply for special permissions for further tracing, so maybe they'd do that, but I don't know whether that would get approved or not. I'm really not sure how that aspect of UK law works. Everything about this case has baffled investigators since day one, and it hasn't got any clearer in the years since. In fact, with more investigation, it just became more unclear why Vera was chosen as a victim. As I mentioned earlier, she was well loved, she was popular, she was likeable, sensible, a real salt of the earth type woman. She had no enemies, she didn't get under people's skin, and they did look closely at the trucker that she'd been dating for around 3 years at this time. He'd stayed at her house the night before, so on Friday the 23rd, and then at 6 a.m. on the Saturday morning, she drove him to the roll-in where he got into his truck and drove home. He was quickly eliminated from all inquiries, and by all accounts, he was devastated. This roll-in was Vera's haunt of choice. She was one of their very few female regulars, but she just really liked it there. The police focused a lot of their investigation on the roll-in in those early days because that's where she connected with people. It was where she socialised. If she was doing somebody she knew a favour that night, chances are she would have met them at the roll-in. But nothing ever came from their inquiries. The weekend of her murder was the August bank holiday weekend, so the roll-in had been very quiet. Most truckers, with it being a trucking stop and motel, had gone home to spend time with their families. But Vera's daughter Lorraine has said there were some dodgy men that spent time at the roll-in, like Vera told her that. Long-distance lorry drivers travelling all over the country, like he could have disappeared from the area very quickly. But again, Vera wasn't on the wrong side of any of them. In fact, all of the truckers were really fond of her. She would do their washing, she would mother them, she would do them favours when they asked. Did one of them maybe take advantage of her kindness on that day, knowing that she dropped everything, even at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night to help? But even then, why would they kill her? What was the motive? It's clear that Vera was comfortable enough with this person to go and drive to a dark and quiet area to help them out, but she wasn't comfortable enough to bring her son along. She also wasn't comfortable enough to admit to her neighbour who it was she was going to help. She told them that she was going to pick something up for her brother. Why not just say friend? Why go to the effort to lie? People have always wondered if the police have maybe hidden an aspect of Vera's past from the public as part of their investigation, but the police have literally come forward and said categorically, no they haven't. With Vera herself and with her case, what you see is what you get. But investigators have never been able to shake the idea that despite all this, this really does seem to be a professional hit. On the day Vera disappeared, Lorraine popped around with her daughter, Vera's granddaughter Danielle, and she said that her mum did seem quiet that day, like she was worried about something, but she didn't share what was on her mind. I guess it was probably one of those things that Lorraine didn't worry too much about at the time, but in hindsight, she can't help but wonder if maybe that was linked to her mother's murder. At 7 a.m. on August 25th, Lorraine opened the door to two detectives on her doorstep asking if she was Vera Anderson's daughter. In that moment, her entire life changed. She says her first thought was of Neil, her 7-year-old brother, who was now going to have to go through life without his mum. And then she had to go to the morgue to identify her own mother before spending 4 hours being questioned herself. Not as a suspect, of course, but investigators had to learn as much about Vera as they possibly could if they wanted to solve this case. I can't even imagine this amount of pain. Lorraine was only 19 at this time. She was a baby. And then she had to go and tell her brother, who did eventually go to live with his dad, but it was just a really horrible, painful time. Lorraine and Neil are still fighting for answers alongside Cheshire Police. In fact, the police say they will not stop working on this case until they're able to give the pair answers. They're doing it for them and for Vera's 7 grandchildren, 6 of whom she's never even met. On the 23rd of March 2022, 2 people were arrested on suspicion of murder in this case, a 70-year-old man and a 61-year-old woman. They were held for a bit and later released under investigation before being released entirely. No further action is being taken against either of them, and further details of this have never been released. We don't know who these people were, we don't know why they were arrested. And then in February of this year, 2024, police released CCTV images of 2 people they wanted to speak to in connection with this case. This was captured at a Tesco Express on Winwick Road in Warrington on the 9th of March 2013, so 22 years after the murder. This was a man in the company of a younger woman, and they have not made it clear what the connection is to Vera's murder at all. DCI Waller just said in a statement, "The smallest detail may help us in bringing justice for Vera and her family. Someone must know what happened that day." The man in the image may have information that could help us with the investigation. We hope that either he will recognise himself in the CCTV and contact us, or maybe someone will recognise him and get in touch with us. As forensic science advances over the years, we have retested evidence, we routinely review material gathered as part of the investigation. This CCTV is another element of this review. We never give up hope when we have information or evidence that could lead us to get answers for Vera's family. All of which is very cryptic, but both the man and the woman quickly came forward identifying themselves, and police withdrew their appeal for information. I am very intrigued, but you just gotta hope the police know what they're doing. I assume they do. This appeal, plus the arrest just a couple of years ago, does give me hope that they're getting closer and closer to an answer in this case. Why else would they be appealing for random people, seemingly random people, to come forward? They've obviously got some line of inquiry that they're following here. As it stands, police are very keen to speak to anyone who was in the area at this time, particularly those who were never spoken to back in 1991. There was the Ferry Tavern, the pub just down the road, and also the Fiddler's Ferry Social Club. If you used to frequent those and may have been there on the night in question, please get in contact with investigators. The main thing they want to do in this case is establish Vera's movements after she left her house that night. Anyone with any information about Vera's murder is asked to contact Cheshire Constabulary on 101. There is a reference number you'll need to quote, but I'll leave it in the description box down below. There's also an online portal through which you can leave tips. Again, it'll be down below. If you do live in the area, Widnes, Penketh, Warrington, Cheshire generally, please do share this episode. Share Vera's story. Talk to people who may have lived in the area at the time. I really do get the feeling that investigators are so close with this case, so even the smallest bit of information here might be able to provide some answers. Vera's children, her grandchildren deserve answers. They've waited long enough, and now they just want closure and peace. Lorraine says that Vera's wish was always to be cremated, but due to the nature of her death, that was impossible. She needed to be buried intact in case she ever needs to be exhumed for further evidence. And if this case gets solved, maybe they will be able to give Vera her last wish. That was just kind of the cherry on top of everything. Like, Vera's last wish couldn't even be followed because they needed her body for evidence so they could catch the person who killed her. I don't know if they do catch the person, if they will ever choose to cremate Vera, but maybe it would just be nice knowing that they can. It just feels like the one final tiny injustice in this case. It's just not fair. Thank you so much for tuning in today. As always, if you made it to this point in the episode, please make sure you are leaving comments down below, liking this video, interacting with it in any way you can, just to let YouTube know they're actually enjoying what you're watching. Maybe they'll push my videos out to other people. And with that, I suppose I'll see you next week. Bye guys.